Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Hello, I'm Chris William, and welcome again to part 2 of Education in the Carolinas. The questions are, how do we change the DNA of education? Business leaders about education. And we'll talk more about it on part 2 in just a minute.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded February 28, 2014. On this week's program, Mike Brenan of BB&T, Pamela Lackey from AT&T, Walter McDowell with Best NC, and Anna Nelson from Spangler Companies. Now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome back. Good to have you all here. We left last week kind of on the edges of policy versus funding. Anna kind of wrapped with you, so let's give you the first word here too. So Anna, there's one thing you can't do. You can't say both. you have to say one or the other. Is the low-hanging fruit throwing more money at it or funding it, or is it changing policy?
I think the best return on investment right now would be to have some policy changes. Basically at our state legislature, because they control the rules and the regulations, the rules of engagement for public education. I would pick if I could pick two things that I would work to change, it would be calendar flexibility, because right now we have a state law that mandates that children be out of school by early June and that they cannot start school until late August. It is done for the benefit of the trade and tourism business, and I understand that. And yet the poor children in our community, at least, do not vacation at the beach or the mountains, nor do they work in the mountains or at the beach. They are suffering immense summer learning loss, and as much as half of the achievement gap between the haves and the have-nots is a result of summer learning loss. Those children go home for those months and are not exposed to enrichment opportunities, and they slide back 3 months of their learning, and it is a tremendous waste of resources, and our law is not allowing them to be in school in those summer months. The other law I would look to is to level the playing field between the traditional public schools and the charter schools. They have different flexibilities and they have different rules, and yet we need both to perform at the highest levels. And specific to that would be rules around human resources, how you recruit a teacher, how you compensate a teacher, how you let a teacher go if the need is there to do that. There are large variances and discrepancies between the rules for traditional public schools and charter schools.
Wow. We could go in a bunch of directions here. I want to bring South Carolina in on this one, absolutely, because the number one business in South Carolina is tourism. Do you end up with the same debate at the State House, banging heads about the school, not just talent, which I think is an important thing to bring up, but school calendar? Does that make sense in the Palmetto State?
Chris, it's interesting in South Carolina that, as you know, I serve on the State Board of Education, and we actually have the ability to provide some flexibility and waiver to our districts and schools, but they've got to come ask us for it. And we've had a number of cases over the last 2 or 3 years where they've come and asked for an earlier start, like an early August, or even in a couple cases, a late July start. And we've been able to grant them that flexibility and waiver. In fact, the State Board of Education is really open to whatever we can control from that standpoint. We are open to listening to where do you need flexibility and waivers to be innovative, to try to do some different things, to try to even do some things that the charter schools are doing. And we're fairly open to that.
Yeah.
And to make Anna's point even further on the calendar issue, because we do have that flexibility, we have one superintendent, for example, who has one of his schools where they go to school all year long. It's not just a year-round school where you're in 9 weeks and then off too, like some year-round schools, but they go to school all year long. And the point he made is that from August until May, I have to follow certain rules and regulations. And so I can't always best meet the needs of the students in front of me because I have to follow a particular rule. But from June to that August start date, while they're still in school, I'm not under the, quote, official school calendar and those official 185 days, so I can do whatever I want. There are no rules and regulations to govern that. So I'm able to help the students, and they're low-income students that he's working with here, I'm able to help those students in whatever way works for them, and they make tremendous amount more progress during that time than they do maybe even during the regular school year.
Pamela, do you think there would be community will if that were more widely known? Do you think other schools, urban and rural, would do that?
I think they might if that local community wanted it. That's one of the things with Transform SC that we've talked about. That's why it doesn't, in our opinion, doesn't need to be a top-down approach, but needs to be a grassroots community approach. If a particular community with the parents and the teachers and the principals and the businesses in the area working together to how can we best meet the needs of these students? Now, we've got a lot of students here who do need that year-round school, so let's implement that. They shouldn't be constrained by certain policies at the state level if that gets in the way of educating children. If it's a matter of safety and health and well-being, those kind of things, then you certainly have to take that into account. But if it's a pure educational policy that doesn't necessarily meet the needs of everybody, we too often throughout our history, and in education particularly, have looked for the silver bullet.
Right.
What's the silver bullet? So we pass a law because somebody shows us that this is the silver bullet, because it worked for maybe one group of students, perhaps, or several groups. And so everybody's got to do it.
Yeah, sure.
That's not going to work. We've shown it's not working. So we've got too many silver bullets that are on the books today.
That's the tinkering, the top-down
The
tinkering. we've been
the
doing.
reform a little bit at a time.
Well, Walter, you said something when we were off the air, and I wrote it down, and I don't want you to break out in a sweat. I mean, it's
right.
okay, and it's called, you said no talent model. What do you mean by that?
Well, what we business leaders, in each one of our companies, we have a talent model. So we decide what kind of employee we want to recruit. So we actively recruit the right kind of employees, and then we provide professional development to those employees, and we have leadership development, and we have competitive compensation. And if you want to be a salesman, you can prosper as a salesman. You don't have to become a manager. Well, I think public education would be well served by refining the talent model. In North Carolina, we're having difficulty recruiting the best and brightest young people to enroll in our schools of education. And they know that when they graduate, they will be paid the lowest starting salary in the Southeast. And to prosper as a teacher financially, you have to become an administrator. So I think there's work to be done in the talent model, because other than parents, there is no more important factor in the educational success of a child than their teacher. So we've got to make sure we have more highly effective teachers in the classroom.
Let's assume that
Right.
let's assume that we do have a talent model and it's agreed on to get it in place.
Right.
How do we fund that? Because the General Assembly is going to say, listen, we don't have any more money, here's the cash. Is that something that businesses would be willing to not write a check for, but to look for alternative sources of revenue? How does the talent model follow the comp like it does in a corporation?
Well, we don't know yet, honestly. We are having conversations about the talent model with the educational leaders and the political leaders in the state. We don't necessarily believe that it would cost a lot more money, but we do believe that a differentiated pay, career ladder approach to education would make sense. I don't think that you throw a lot more money at it. I think you need to reform the system first, show that it can produce better outcomes, and then you properly fund it, but over a long period of time.
Anna, you've got some hard evidence now. Project Lift has been up and running. What has been surprising to you about leadership and talent? And who is important in this mix?
Well, to Walter's point, there's nothing and no one more important to educational achievement for a child than having an excellent teacher. And this is an excellent teacher every year,
Right.
not episodically. If we could do one thing, it would be to provide every child that excellent teacher. Of course, you get excellent teachers by having an excellent leader, an excellent principal. The best teachers want to be in the right culture and with the right and to work for the right leader. So it's very, very important to recruit and retain the best principals. What I agree with Walter that there are different models and different ways to vary compensation such that the high school chemistry teacher is not paid the same amount as the second grade kickball teacher, which might surprise people to learn that. And yet, we do need to raise the base level of teachers. And that is not a private company proposition. That is a public proposition. It needs to be prioritized. It needs to happen. Our public school teachers now do not receive a raise even through 5 years of service. And so you have a person who cannot afford they cannot afford their lifestyle on $30,000. They can't be a parent and take care of their child. So we must put a priority on more dollars for teacher compensation.
So did Governor McCrory do the right thing by proposing teacher pay raise?
It is surely a step in the right direction. So we're encouraged. We find that in LIFT, when we put private dollars in support of teacher talent, I guess not surprisingly, but we are disheartened to see that many of those teachers are recruited away from us.
Is that a frustrating piece?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So how,
But it's a compliment as well.
I was going to say, it's got to be a good sign.
Yes, because not so many years ago, no one would have thought to look for talent in this particular zone of schools.
So where do they go if they're being recruited?
They're recruited to other school systems, other states that pay more. South Carolina, they can drive a few miles across the line and they're paid more in South Carolina.
Is there a different metric? Mike, is there a different metric for comp, teacher comp, principal comp, incentive? Are we looking at this the right way? I mean, it's easy to say, and it's great for programs like this to say, gosh, we need to pay teachers more. It's going to have such a great effect. But do we need to think about the way that we incentivize, if that's the right word, teacher performance to get the student doing the right thing?
Well, we're wrestling with that in South Carolina right now because we're trying to figure out how do we properly evaluate performance of our teachers. We think we do a pretty good job of it in business and industry. We're not so sure that that's occurring in public education. But you know, it's interesting that the amount of money spent in public education over the years has grown both in North Carolina and in South Carolina. The issue is that most of that gets spent on bureaucratic regulations, compliance, both the state and federal programs, and less of that money gets to the classroom or gets to the teacher where it really needs to be so they can have excellent teachers and excellent principals. But I think we do have to rethink how we evaluate and then the compensation that goes with that.
It goes back to the silver bullet idea that we were talking about. You can, if you look at every school district in South Carolina, and you look at their achievement level, and I'm sure that's true in North Carolina and some other states too, I would suspect it is, you would be maybe surprised at the amount of money per pupil that a school district is spending versus another school district, and the results are very different. And part of that is that silver bullet line item funding mentality that we've had for many, many years. We're putting that money toward, we implement a program, so we put money in it in order for them to be able to comply with it and to hire extra help or whatever. But as opposed to working on the fundamental aspects of what goes on in a classroom and what funds are needed there to be able to meet the needs of the students.
How do charter schools change the arc of education? How do they diffuse talent? How do they change the way that we think about the delivery of education? I mean, whether you're for charters or against charters, they're in the Carolinas and they're coming in larger numbers. So how do they fit into what all of this we've talked about?
Well, it's interesting. In South Carolina, we've actually engaged their public charter schools. I have to keep reminding people that charter schools are public schools. But we've brought them to the table in this Transform South Carolina initiative because we think we have some things to learn from them supposedly because they've been freed up from a lot
Regulation.
and given more flexibility. We need to learn from that. And quite frankly, then how do we apply that to more traditional public schools? So we've got something to learn from those public charters.
Yeah, Walter, what do you think?
Well, I am comfortable with the charter school idea. I think initially it was to be an innovation, to be a center of innovation, a center of excellence. But I would agree with Anna's earlier comments that the way we do charters in North Carolina, they are not properly accountable. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to take a look at fully integrating the traditional public school and the charters to make sure that all are performing at a higher level.
I think of charters. We talked about charters. Some of our research has shown that charters are an agent of change. There's no doubt. They cause us to think about education differently. And I want to bring us back to a question about. And Walter, I want to stay with you on this because you are the point of the spear. I'm going to use that term again for businesses in North Carolina. As you spend more time in this new endeavor, in this initiative for changing education, is business prepared to change themselves as they get in the mix here? In other words, it's not going to be uniform and it's not going to be orderly. That it's going to be messy and it's going to be lumpy. How does business hold on to that and say, we're out of our bailiwick here? To some degree. So I guess the question is, what are some of the conversations that you're having in your group about discovering uncomfortable things and being able to put your arms around that and say, yeah, but this is part of it. How can we use that?
Well, I would say that each and every company in North Carolina that has been successful over time does that in their own shop. I mean, the way that you operate a successful company over time is that you understand what your strengths and weaknesses are and that you have the courage to address the weaknesses and to capitalize on the strengths. So I think the private sector recipe and the one that we live and breathe in our own companies is well suited to the complexity and to the challenges of education over time. Yeah. All of us have transformed our companies over time. We have evolved, we've changed. We've been willing to do the tough stuff, and we'll simply apply those business principles to the education space.
Going a little bit different direction. Anna, as you have directed, and we use Project Lift because it's something you intimately know and lead, but as Project Lift goes down the road here with the changes and the implementations, and you see the different unintended and intended consequences of what you're doing, how does this change the philanthropic idea of being engaged in education? And the question is not just funding, but this is going to take a substantial amount of philanthropic gifts and involvement to move this needle.
Right.
So what happens to the other initiatives that go on out there that will now have to be redirected or rethought?
Well, you're right. This has been a massive coordination of dollars and effort. And that was part of the power of the project, was that something my company or my organization can't do alone might be possible with a collective impact of a number of companies. And we're highly coordinated, we're highly focused, we're all on the same page, we all have the same learnings, so we have a common conversation that's highly effective. And so in a way, it raises the bar for accountability for all of the nonprofits that serve the public schools, because when they talk to any of us, we're all equally informed as to which of these interventions work and which don't work so well. So it's positive for those who are performing and raising student achievement, and it's less means less support for those organizations who might mean well but are not achieving results.
Is there to the same, Pamela, I'd like to answer this too, but is there a sharing of information? And I know there is, but to the questions that we just had with Walter, is there a sharing of information that says, you know, that's kind of uncomfortable. I didn't expect that. I didn't know that, but let's take that on and figure that out. And how do you go through that?
Well, that's essential because you have to make difficult decisions and difficult prioritization. And even though there are lots of organizations that have good hearts and good intentions to support schools, they're not always pulling the rope in the same direction, and they might be working at cross purposes with each other, or are inefficient in their efforts. And so we've had to have some very difficult conversations around the table because some of us are personally connected to some of these supporting organizations. We might be on their boards, right? And so we've had to make decisions as a group that have been challenging, but because we're all on the same page and we're all looking at the same data, we're generally coming to the same points of view.
Do you have to have that kind of courage?
I think you do, and also it's a matter of setting your priorities. What is it that is of most what's most crucial to your success as a business and as a community. That's why at AT&T several years ago we said we've got to own the graduation issue and have more students graduate from high school. So that's why we devoted $350 million of our foundation's money to helping high school graduation success. But not only the dollars, but then your other efforts have to be coordinated with whatever your priority is. We have a goal of 1 million mentoring hours being devoted to students across the country by AT&T executives through job shadowing and through direct mentoring of them and working with our colleagues in the application side through something called Game Desk to develop tools for learning that are more suited to today's digital natives. As opposed to the people around this table who are digital immigrants, to this world. That's the way they learn today. And so it's setting the priorities for your own company and your own community, and then saying we're all going to put our dollars and our efforts and our sweat equity there.
Chris, what I would say is that the Winston-Salem experience, it is the funders finally realized that to solve the problem, to intervene with kids early. To intervene with kids early is a more effective solution than to intervene with them later in life. 80% of our prison inmates in North Carolina are a high school dropout. And the social cost that we bear in our communities is so directly related to the academic experience that those young people had. So the road to recovery passes through education.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to understand that formula? Why can't we? Is it because it's such a long-term return on investment? Is that what it is?
That's a major issue, Chris.
Is it?
Well, it's an
absolutely is.
18-year return on investment from
Right,
birth
right,
to high school
right,
graduation.
right.
It's a long time.
And that's a lot longer than a politician's career. And
And we tend to think in terms of the legislature.
Legislative cycle.
Right.
2 years or
Right.
4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. We got about a minute left. Would you expect 2014? Is 2014 going to be, is it going to be a banner year for education, or is it going to be more of just, kind of leaning into the grindstone and getting things done? Would you expect any major announcements one way or another?
Well, I don't know about major announcements, but I think it's a banner year for education in South Carolina, in my opinion, because everybody from the business community to the parents to the teachers to the administrators and our including our governor and legislature are all focused on education. What do we need to do to improve the results of our system of education so that we have students who are coming out of school who are career college and citizenship ready?
And Chris,
Pamela,
it's business that got them moving in that direction because they finally recognize that we're the consumers of that.
That's the last word. Michael, you get the last word. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you for everything you do, not just being on the program. Until next week, good night. I'm Chris.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.